Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night. We got Wham here with us. We got Bill Kousoulas here with us. Did I said it wrong again, didn't I?
That's okay. You're good. Close enough.
Say it one good time for everybody.
Kousoulas.
Kousoulas. It's pretty easy. In school, for some reason, I do pretty good pronunciation, but I had to go through little weird classes where they gave you flashcards to say stuff. And I would say toe man instead of snowman. So I had a card that said snowman on it. Like one of those. But occasionally I have relapses of that, but not often, thank God.
You just want to make your own language is the
yeah.
truth.
That's a toe man, not a snowman. Damn it. It's a toe man. But great to have you here, Bill. Great to have Wham here. And we had Andrew Colvin here. That was a good one if you missed it. Secrets of Mothman revealed. And got into the Nazis. The Nazis. So that got crazy. What you well, one thing I wanted to say is I've been in the news circuit for a while at a particular job that is torturing that I've worked at for a long time, and I have to share news a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of it is on a political right side. So it's like watching paint dry when my boss sends me stuff to put up, and I'm like, oh, it's like hellish, some of the stuff. So a lot of these radio personalities on the right, but the way they're hyping up this eclipse right now, I've seen so many weird things over the years that are supposed to happen, did happen, like these certain dates and events, and this is going to happen. None of it ever happens, which is what I'm leaning towards, with the eclipse and everything. But the level they're doing it at right now, it's like a horror movie. I mean, I'm talking about right-wing preachers saying it's the seal of revelation, remote viewing Ed Danes. It's the kill shot, which I forget even what that means. Something bad that happens. The kill shot, the X.
It's the kill shot is supposed to be a huge solar flare that knocks out all of our, that basically knocks out all of our electronics and causes our civilization to crash. That's what the kill shot is.
Just that.
just that. But yeah, actually with an eclipse there couldn't be a kill shot at the same time, but whatever. I mean, I guess one could be coming towards us, but and of course, I mean, and I've been tracking it in real time, but both of you probably heard there was an earthquake here where I am this morning. Yes. And in fact, there was an aftershock just an hour and a half ago, pretty strong one. And I knew as soon as I felt it, I knew that there would be these linkages between the eclipse and the earthquake, and they've already started. I mean, it's,
Yeah, I've heard different things like NASA's shooting rockets at it now, and CERN has turned something. CERN's doing something, I guess, right as it during it, which who knows if that's true. I don't know.
See, here's the thing. CERN, they were probably planning on turning CERN on anyway, but CERN's like on the other part of the planet. You know what I mean? It's like not even where the eclipse is going to happen. An eclipse happens, a total solar eclipse that happens on an average of every 18 months that hits somewhere on the planet. But for some reason, when it's in America, it's prophetic. Most of the time it's over the ocean, so it's like, this is a natural occurrence,
Yeah. I haven't seen that crazy QAnon crap, that I think this might be a Russian psyop or it's just some jerk offs. But anyway, they're releasing like preparation list items to have on handy and stay out of the big cities, and that's that whole Trump cult thing, and they're hyping it up. So it's definitely a horror movie type situation. Be more concerned about a foreign nation doing something during it, like a nuke or something, or something horrible, but definitely creepy. Well, Bill, good to have you here. Tell us about PRP. Say that first word. Is that a new word? That's one I can't. I know phenomenology.
You got it. Okay. It's almost as bad as Kousoulas. It seems like people trip over that one as much as they do my last name. But I mean, really, it's a qualitative methodology. That's what phenomenology is. I'm sure Professor Wham is aware of that.
Oh, I studied phenomenology.
So
German phenomenology, actually.
You know it, and you know it better than I do. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the question, Jeffrey Wham. Thanks for having me on the show tonight. I'm sorry Jackie couldn't make it, but we've been doing the book circuit with our first book, Bridging the Tragedy, about the Silver Bridge disaster and the good things that came as a result of that catastrophe. And we've recently kicked off our next project, which is going to be another qualitative study that's investigating the relationship between trauma and paranormal experiences. So we kicked that off about a month ago. We've done 3 interviews so far. We've got a few more on the docket going forward, and we're looking for maybe 12 to 15 people so that we can do a similar analysis to what we did for the first book.
Cool.
Definitely fascinating with that. And what does I know when I think of trauma and PTSD with my experiences, a lot of my stuff is when you see something like, for instance, a UFO or more UFOs, and it seems like they're there because of you at your house. And I don't remember ever being taken or anything, but I've seen them on levels where it feels like that. And it's been a while, but there's been fears of not wanting to leave the house. And it's not like that. Well, maybe sometimes still like that. But back then I was like, I ain't going out there ever, because I thought there was things, I saw things in the windows. I saw craft with witnesses. So I think I have, some stuff with that's probably, psychological. And then there's the fact that, first off, I don't think I've been taken, but when they're there on that level, it's possible, and you just don't got mind wipe. Like, I don't know. So that's part of it. But I know I have some situations upstairs from it all. There's no doubt about that. But what is it mostly to do with UFO stuff, or is there other things, or what entails it all?
Well, we're kind of casting a pretty wide net for this one, because we haven't come out and said, we need you to talk to us if you've experienced trauma, and if you've been abducted, or if you've seen UFOs, or if you've encountered ghosts or poltergeists or Mothman or what have you. We've not tightened it up that much. We've kept it broader purposefully, because the goal is, I've heard over the years that trauma can open the door for paranormal experience. And I'd like to investigate that, to be able to validate it and to prove if that's actually something that's going to give us evidence across a broad spectrum of different percipients in different ways. So to answer your question, we're not looking specifically at people who have been abducted, although one of the 3 people we've interviewed so far has had extraterrestrials in his life for 40 years. So he definitely has spoken to his encounters that he's had with what he believes are extraterrestrials or ultra terrestrials. The other people we've talked to, their phenomena is more along the lines of succubus/incubus from one person, and then the third one has had more of your traditional haunting type manifestations. So really, the first 3 people we've talked to have had totally different experiences.
And I think with mine, part of the reason that my senses opened up was something traumatic, which was testicular cancer at 17 and losing one, waking up crying to find out, we took a nut from you. That's pretty traumatizing. And now you get to go through chemo. Pick door number 2. And then of course I went through all that. And then my dad died several, years later. And it just seemed like between that and that, something kicked up. And I've had like medicine men and shamans and stuff say that probably opened my senses. And I jokingly say Odin's eye, but an eye is probably maybe a little bit more important than a nut. That's debatable, I guess. But so I don't let that go to my head. But a traumatic event that opens up your senses, is that something you're looking into too, as far as like something like mine, like situations like that?
I think that's the basis for what we're trying to investigate, although we're trying to be really careful to not put qualifiers around the experiences that the people that we talk to have. Basically, meaning we don't want to infer that trauma opens the door for the paranormal. We want to talk to people who have had both experiences and then let them tell us what their story is. It might be that paranormal experience is the trauma. It might be that the paranormal activity manifests first and then the trauma happens afterwards in a different way. So, I mean, we're looking at it from both ends of the spectrum, but I would say the one that speaks to me the most clearly is what you just said. Does trauma open the door for paranormal activity? That's the one that really kind of piqued my interest in investigating the phenomena, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's there's many layers to it, and that what we just discussed would be one, and then when you actually have the event, that can be traumatic in itself. So that's another layer. There's different layers to the cake, to the onion, for sure, with trauma and stuff. And then also I saw a lot of answers to a lot of occult reading and things, and I've seen things on Whitley Strieber's site about people messing with the occult, bringing some of that stuff to you, which can do it. So mine could be trauma, that so many different layers. But it's definitely interesting when you have the being experiences where you see something just so bizarre that you never thought you would ever see something like that before. Like, for instance, there's several I can think of, and I've mentioned them so many times, but there was one where there was 3 cloaked beings in a black box, and a friend saw it with me, and we were partying and doing stuff. But as far as we both agreed that we saw it, and a cat jumped towards them, and they vanished like into thin air. And you always wonder, did something else happen during that, and you just don't remember it. There's another one when I was walking down the road with a dog, and a weird rusty orange ball UFO went over the sky, like very, very over the treetops. And at first you look around like, is there a chain holding that, or a helicopter? Or no, it was just a weird orange rusty ball floating through the sky. And you wonder, well, did they take me during that? I don't think so, but what if they did? You don't know. That's the part of it that's kind of traumatic too, the not knowing what the hell happened and why it's there and why you're seeing it to begin with. It's a lot of different layers for sure.
Yes.
And what is the end product of all this? Is that, are you going to turn it into a book to release all of the findings of all of it? That's the end product.
It will be, yes. As a matter of fact, our first book, Bridging the Tragedy, we interviewed 11 people who had either experienced the Silver Bridge disaster in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 66 and 67, and or they also experienced Mothman, paranormal phenomena, UFOs, the things that were reported that happened right before the Silver Bridge disaster. The way that we set that up was through 6 chapters, and it was basically set up like a psychological study or dissertation, so to speak. So we had an introduction, talked about the study, gave a little background to what the study was about, and then we tied the interviews in to the book also. So let's say, chapter 1 is the introduction, chapter 2 is the background to the study, and we incorporated 3 different interviews that we had with the people who participated in the study into that. And then we went into a background of like a literature review, giving us some of the text that we used to investigate the phenomena, things that talked about growth after trauma, things that talked about looking at negative circumstances in a positive light along the lines of positive psychology. And then we actually laid out the whole data analysis process. So we had tables, we had charts and graphs. We showed all the different coding that we applied throughout the data analysis to show how we arrived to determine the positive things that happened as a result of the study. So to answer your question, the next book is going to be very similar to that. We're going to lay it out like a psychological study. We're going to get the interviews that we do transcribed and then edited and cleaned up and polished a little bit, and then go through the data analysis process to be able to illustrate, what good comes from trauma and paranormal activity. And so that's the way it'll lay out. in a nutshell.
Definitely, if you can find someone else to transcript those, do it. Don't you do it, because I've done it before for Andy and that Praise for the Hairy Man book and mini books, where you listen to your radio show and type it. And I actually put my hand through a door punching it, which is not something I do, but it sucks. You have to sit there and just type everything. Oh my God. I could never do it again. Not with my arthritis and stuff, but I would definitely, it's horrible.
I would not do it myself. I'll tell you. Since we did the first one, we did have somebody do transcriptions for us. Jackie did a little bit of transcriptions. I don't get involved with any of that. I've got my hands full of doing the psychological analysis, so that's plenty of work for me. But now with AI being what it is, Jackie has actually found an app that she can use, I think through Microsoft Word, that will automatically transcribe everything, but she still has to go through and proof it. So
Right.
one of our interviews was 3.5 hours long. It's already 50 pages. We can't use 50 pages for one interview. We'll have to dial that back a little bit. But with AI, it makes it a lot easier to do than having to do everything manually.
Oh yeah, those voice to text things are really, they're really valuable. Yeah, I mean, they're used in education now all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're really valuable. I've thought about this topic for a long time. Not only in terms of my own life, but it's when I wrote my dissertation on the abduction narrative, that was something that came up in it, not just simply as something to study, because actually Kenneth Ring did a study about this back in the 1990s. And he showed some correlation, but it was one of those things where, he's a social psychologist. So it was like, there was more study that needed to be done. So, in my dissertation, I talk a little bit about it. But there's also a sense in which, at least when I was writing my dissertation, which was, now it's been over 20 years ago, at the time, there was this whole school of thought about abductions, particularly, and how, in a sense, the traumatic aspect of that, especially if it could be linked to other traumas earlier in life, was kind of used as the index of its authenticity. Because nobody's going to tell someone who's in pain that they're a liar, basically, you know what I mean? And so there were certain, for a long time, there were certain abduction investigators who really focused only on those contact or abduction cases where there was some trauma or discomfort obviously present. And they would always try to link it back maybe to other things that happened in their lives earlier, as either, proof that these abduction experiences had been going on, for however long. It was, in a sense, that was the way in which you knew that an abduction was real. And of course, what that was it completely obscured a lot of the more bizarre, but maybe possibly positive experiences that people had, and I always felt, like in my own life, I've had a lot of trauma in my life too. It started very young with sexual and physical abuse when I was like 4 years old. And I've had a number of different experiences through my life, almost died 3 times, a lot of violence. But I also had my first really profound UFO experience when I was like 6 years old. It was like a life-changing event. And I don't know if they're connected. I experience them as very distinct. One not necessarily connected to the other, because the sighting was traumatic too. And by that time, the sexual abuse was sort of, I didn't consciously remember it all the time because it had happened when I was really young. And so, I have I mean, in my mind, I think that there are a number of factors that may create a circumstance, or, you know, create a, I mean, what Kenneth Ring was trying to figure out was whether or not, you know, trauma plus other things might create a kind of contact or paranormal prone personality, I guess. And all I can say is that in my case, I think it was a combination of factors. I think there was trauma, which kind of always takes you out of yourself in a certain way. It does cause a kind of disassociation. And then, but I also was raised in a household where paranormal experiences were accepted as normal. You know, like my father was very religious in a very strange way. And he had paranormal experiences, but he interpreted them within that, you know, religious frame, and subjected me and my brother to that religious frame. So in my household, it was just assumed that weird things might happen. And so, you know, and as I got older, all of that stuff, I think, sort of meshed together. And what it created in me was a person who was interested in whatever the truth was about these kinds of things. And so I was always sort of questing, you know, and I think that part of that was me too. It was, you know, my personality. I tend to be intellectual. I tend to be, you know, I'm smart. I tend to be a searching kind of person. And if I had a different kind of personality, I don't know that I would have done that. You know what I mean? And so eventually down the line, I had to just sort of figure out how this stuff was all connected in my mind. And so I don't know that one for me caused the other or anything, or how they're connected exactly. You know, I've been asked, well, you know, if you hadn't had those traumatic experiences when you were very young, do you think you would have had the UFO experience? I have no idea. You know, I do think, however, that the UFO experience, I understand what Jeffrey's saying. That UFO experience, when I had it, it was me and a friend who was older. She was like 6 years older than me. And we both saw this thing together. And it profoundly affected both of us and really changed me a lot. But it was scary because I had no frame of reference for it. So, you know, that part freaked me out. But I think, you know, I don't know if they're connected, although I did have the experience when it was going on that it was about us, that it was directed at us. I did have that experience. And that's part of what made it scary, because here's this weird thing. You don't know what it is, but it feels like it's directed at us, that we're the ones that it is paying attention to. So that was strange, you know. But, you know, so I do have this interesting relationship with like traumatic events and you know, the paranormal. But, you know, I guess having had a lot of trauma doesn't necessarily make me any less kind of trembly and scared when paranormal stuff happens. You know, I work out at this gym right now, and this gym is haunted, and everybody that goes there for any length of time will experience something. I mean, seriously, will experience something. And I've experienced maybe 3 or 4 things there, not nearly as dramatic as some other people that have been there, but enough that I don't like to go upstairs by myself because I'm uncomfortable with it. It's not that I think anything's going to happen to me. I don't like disembodied voices talking to me when by myself. I just have this sort of stop talking, you know, that kind of thing. I'm trying to box, quit talking, you know. But anyway, so it sounds like an interesting study. I mean, certainly, you know, there's more work that needs to be done on all of it. You know,
That's a great commentary. Thank you. I was thinking as you were talking, Jaci, one of the reasons we focused on this particular potential relationship, because I think, like you, just because an individual has experienced trauma, which I think to some degree, most, if not all of us have in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, at some point, eventually, anyway.
Right, right. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that trauma begets the paranormal activity or vice versa. But I think it's something that's worth examining, which is why we've decided to do that. And I've not been one that's had what I would call profound personal paranormal experiences. I have had some strange occurrences this last year, which is new to me because I've not really had a lot of that type of thing in the past. But we built a new home. We moved in about 14, 15 months ago. And I'm in my mid 50s. So I have a 50 plus year old back. It's not in the greatest of shape. And in my head, I still felt like I was 35 years old until after we moved in. And we moved a lot of appliances and did a lot of heavy lifting that I really had no business doing. And a month after we moved in, I had a traumatic back injury that hospitalized me, and I had to relearn how to walk again. I have sciatica now. I never had that before. And
it's
I do
painful.
physical
It's
therapy.
painful as hell, isn't it?
It's very uncomfortable. It's
I have it
really,
too.
yeah, it's really uncomfortable, but it's in my right leg. And after we had moved in, and after this happened, I had a gentleman that I went to grade school with, who I really hadn't seen since shortly after high school. He and his wife came to visit with us. And when they came to our house, I was still getting around with a walker at the time. And I had to go into the bedroom for something. And we have these two big lab puppies, and they were about a year old at this time. And one of them was very hyper. Our black lab was incredibly hyper. But this particular night, I went into the bedroom, and she was in the bedroom with me, and she was standing still, and she wouldn't move, and she wouldn't bark, and she wouldn't do anything. That was very unusual for her. And shortly after that, when she did move, she was limping on her right leg. Now, my right leg was giving me trouble. Her right leg was giving her trouble. Jaci had problems with her right leg. And then our other dog started having problems with her right leg also. So we have become good friends with Andy Colvin and his friend Harriet. They both grew up on Woodward Lane in Charleston, West Virginia. And Harriet is like a medical intuitive. She's very psychic. She has a lot of abilities. And she drilled in on a Zoom meeting with us and said, "You've got something on your land. I don't see it as being a negative entity. It's not there to particularly harm you, but we've kind of come to the conclusion that when this was raw farmland, which it was not terribly long ago, somebody had some type of a farming accident and it did damage to their right side, because everybody, all four of us, my wife, me, the two dogs, have all had trouble with our right legs since we moved in here."
Yeah, it's, you know, where I live, it's an old settlement. Like, we live in one of the first houses that was built in this area in New York. And so it's not that the house here is haunted, it's just old. So it has and it sits on, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's like 4 springs and a well around and under the house. So there's lots of water. And we have, you know, I've experienced a number of things in this house, and so has my partner, actually, who he doesn't actually believe in paranormal stuff that much, but he has experienced a few things too. And I figure it's just the house. It's the memories of the house, you know, that occasionally demonstrate themselves in one way or another. You know, you'll hear footsteps coming up and down, or you'll hear just doors opening, where, you know, there were doors at one time in the house, but there aren't now, you know. So it's just stuff like that. It's not I've never felt unsafe here. It's just memories of the place. But to me, and there's a graveyard that's like literally like a lot and a half away. It's like we're right by the community fire station. So there's a lot there that's in the back. And then the next thing is the graveyard. So there's just stuff around. And I've been through a lot in this house already, but you do have to pay attention to the house, because the house occasionally wants to pay attention to you in various ways.
Right.
It's sort of like in Scandinavian folklore, it would be the tomte, the power of the house wants, or the energy of the house wants to pay attention to you. So you do have to do little things. I give the house little offerings every now and then to keep it happy, to let it know that, yes, we care about you,
Sure. Jackie has had a lot of experiences throughout her life. And unfortunately, she can't be here tonight. But if I could speak for her, when she was a little girl, she was exposed to a lot of trauma in her family of origin. Dad was a raging alcoholic and never really physically abused her, but she has survivor's guilt from seeing some of the abuse that happened to her siblings. And during this time in her life as a young child, 6, 7, 8 years old, one evening, she and her siblings all saw an apparition at the end of the hallway that they described as they thought it was Jesus. And she wasn't afraid of this apparition at all until her older siblings started freaking out and said, "You need to come here. You need to come here. Everybody's scared." Well, she wasn't until then, but she experienced that. She also experienced a being that she describes as being like Richard Shaver's Darrow, this giant, wandering robotic type thing in a field when she and her siblings and cousins were out playing out on some farmland she grew up on. She saw that being, and probably the scariest thing that she's experienced has been disembodied heads on the dresser in her bedroom at night. And she saw that growing up and didn't see it again for 50 plus years until right before we moved into this house at our old place. So she saw that happen again too. So she has really directly experienced paranormal activity. She can perceive UFOs. She's seen different lights in the sky. And then she said, "Take a look up there. I see all these different bubbles. I don't see them." And John Keel talked about how people with higher psychic acumen can perceive paranormal activity, where those of us like myself who don't really have that developed faculty don't see it. So she would see it and get angry with me because I couldn't see it, and I couldn't see it. So I got angry with her because I couldn't see what she was talking about.
Yeah, it's not useful to be angry about these things. I mean, I don't really see stuff either, or very rarely do I see stuff. There's been maybe, other than the UFO, I haven't really, and one poltergeist. Well, you don't see the poltergeist, you see the effects of the poltergeist. I did experience a situation where there was poltergeist activity going on in a friend's house, and I did witness that. But I don't see much, but I hear a lot. I hear things, and I also smell things. I have this thing with smelling. Like I can tell if, and sort of I'm very good at vibes, feeling when the energy of a room has changed, or experiencing something, a presence. I mean, one of my favorite stories is something that happened here where I'm actually, I'm in my office, my bedroom's right behind me. And this happened a few years ago. I've told this story before. But this is kind of the way I am. I had started doing some specific offerings to the land, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I mean, just sat straight up in bed, and I could tell that there were beings in my office. They'd come in the open window. They were in my office. And I was wide awake, and I distinctly heard somebody say, "She lives here." Just like that. "She lives here." And I yelled through the door, "Get out." And they left, because that's my reaction to things. It's like, do not wake me up in the middle of the night with your stuff. If you can't come in while I'm awake, then forget it. Just don't even bother me, But I've had stuff like that happen here. The last thing that I had, really extraordinary thing that I had, was in 2020, February 2020, when I got COVID. I got one of the first cases of COVID here in Ulster County, and it was one of the original variants. It was the Italian variant that came over, and I was really sick. I mean, I got the pneumonia and everything, and I thought I was going to die, honestly. I mean, I didn't end up going to the hospital because my oxygen never fell below a certain level, but I was really sick. And I was also dealing with the fact that a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, was dying of esophageal cancer at exactly the same time that I was really sick. And I had a health crisis about 2 weeks into the illness. I had a health crisis where I just couldn't breathe. It was like, I remember I was sitting up in bed. I had to sleep sitting up, and I was really aware of the fact that this could kill me, whatever was going on, that this could kill me. They didn't have tests yet, so we didn't know for sure that it was COVID. They later on figured out that it was. They took the antibody test. I took the antibody test. But I was sitting up, and all of a sudden there was this presence at the foot of my bed, and it was tangible enough that it's like my feet were sticking out, under the covers. It was tangible enough that it felt like it was sitting on my feet. And I interacted with it for several hours, because it basically was explaining to me what I needed to do in order to live.
Oh, wow.
And how some of what was going on with me was connected to grief, and some of what was going on with me was connected to other things that I wouldn't let go of. And I mean, it was like if you want to recover from this, it wasn't denying that there was a disease there, but the idea that so you may get diseases not just simply because you catch them, but because they are a teaching mechanism in some way. If you've ever heard about that. But it was like, yeah, you have this disease, but the reason it's killing you is because of this. And I was given very specific instructions. And as long as I followed those instructions, the symptoms would lessen. But if I sort of varied from those instructions, it would get, and I went back and forth, like most of the night. And eventually I must have done it well enough, did my work well enough that I finally fell asleep. And when I woke up the next morning, I could tell something had changed. And so I started getting better then. It still took me 6 months to fully recover from it, but I started getting better then. And but the presence was very physical. It was like I could almost see it. It was like kind of a shadow. It was sitting on my feet. It was kind of a shadow. It was about human size, but it wasn't black, like the shadow figures. It was kind of gray, and it was just there. And I had like a low light on in the room because I had like a vaporizer in the room. I had a low light on in the room, and so I could sort of see it. And I don't know what it was, who it was. I never asked. I figured if it was going to help me get well, I should just shut up and follow its instructions. I guess it could have been some kind of projection of me. I don't know, but it was pretty weird. I had a lot of weird dreams around that illness too. Like I had dreams about a pandemic hitting us like back in October, the October before the pandemic. So I had a lot of interesting things surrounding the pandemic. What were you going to say, Jeff? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying it was you from the future.
Maybe so. Maybe so. Me from the future.
We both developed COVID right before you did. In fact, December of 2020, our granddaughter, who was living with us at the time, was working in an Alzheimer's facility right down the street from us.
Well, it would have had to have been 2019 because remember,
19, I get 19.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine.
So she on Christmas morning got a text from her supervisor that she failed her COVID test, and she was 16 years old, so we knew she'd likely be okay. Jackie is autoimmune, so she was mortified at the thought of getting COVID, which of course we both did. Now, we weren't able to take the COVID tests on Christmas Day, obviously, but as soon as we could, we took them. And I remember the two of us were breaking down cardboard boxes from Christmas in the garage on New Year's Eve. And then New Year's Day, we were both sick. In fact, I got super sick first. And we used one of those electronic thermometers that you hold up to your forehead.
Right.
And so it could be wrong. So I just want to go on record and state that it may have been wrong because it wasn't under the tongue and it was touchless, but it registered 105.5 fever,
right.
which is astronomical. And for an adult, that's lethal. Thankfully, that was as bad as it got. And from that point forward, I slowly got better, but I missed about 3.5 weeks worth of work. Jackie got sick just a few days after I did, and she got deathly ill. And I tried to talk her into going to the hospital, and she refused. As I'm sure you remember, hospitals were like death wards at that point. You go to the hospital basically to die. They don't know what they're doing, really. It's overcrowded. People are on ventilators, et cetera, et cetera. It took her a month before she could get back to work. And a week after she went back to work, she said, "Do you remember when you tried to get me to go to the hospital and I refused?" I said, "Of course I remember that." She said, "Do you know why I refused?"
Because she'd die.
Well, she said if I was going to die, I was going to die at home. She thought she was going to die. It was that bad. Now, interestingly enough, the summer before COVID hit, I caught some mysterious virus. We went down to the Ozarks and came back from there, and we thought that I'd been bit by a tick because I developed some kind of illness. And after 3 or 4 days, which is usually the length of an illness for me, and then I get better, I was getting worse. So I went to the doctor, and they said, "We think you have diverticulitis. We're going to give you 2 heavy-duty antibiotics. Take those, go home. When they're done, you'll be better." So I went through the whole cycle. These things beat me half to death. They were powerful, so powerful. At the end of the cycle, I was just as sick as I was before. So I went back to the doctor, and they said, "You know what? We misdiagnosed you. You didn't have diverticulitis. You had a virus. We don't know what it is, but we're going to have to give you more antibiotics because what happened to you is that the antibiotics we gave you killed all the good bacteria. Now you have a bowel infection. So
Oh,
I
for
went from
God's
having a
sake.
virus to a bacterial infection. I missed 6 weeks worth of work prior to COVID, but it almost seemed like it was a precursor to COVID.
Yeah, I mean, well, we know that. I mean, I've kept track of, you know, like some of the forensic studies that they've been doing on the virus, on the, you know, the coronavirus that causes COVID, and they do know that it was circulating in Italy among some Chinese migrant workers that were in Italy doing some special kinds of stonework as early as August 2019. And they found this out quite accidentally. The migrant workers had been brought in for this special project. There were like 300 of them, and they'd been brought in for this special project, and they all had to undergo blood testing, routine blood testing, just, you know, because they were going to be in the country for a while. It was just part of a health profile, you know, as they came in. And but vials of their blood were kept. And so what they were just doing some routine testing of those vials of blood, and they decided to test them for the coronavirus. And they were like almost they had like almost 200 samples, and 18 of them came back positive for COVID. So
Wow.
what that means is that they'd been exposed to COVID already in China and had developed antibodies. That's what it means. So what an early version of it was circulating much earlier, which is not uncommon in viruses. Oftentimes viruses have to do that before they become virulent enough to start actually spreading. They have to go through certain stages of mutation. So, you know, but it was already present in certain forms by the summer.
And that's when
of
I experienced
2019.
it. I'm
Right.
going to need to take a break for a couple of minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
Go
So
for it.
I'll mute myself and stop my camera, and I'll be back with you in
Sure.
about 5
Okay.
minutes.
Go ahead.
No
Okay,
problem.
thanks.
And let's see. Goodness, it's April. Oh,
Yeah, it's April. It's past Easter. We're done with all that.
and I noticed when Andy was saying a lot of, I guess, terrorist stuff happens during April, or weird things like
Weird stuff happens in April. Yeah. I mean, we're
shit
under most
being-
of April, we're under Mercury retrograde.
Oh my God, when's that start?
It started at the April 1st, and it goes
Oh,
and it goes until April 25th. So it's
I
kind of
didn't
a
even
long
know
way.
it started, but something felt weird.
Yeah, and then we have the eclipse, and who knows? Who knows what else is happening?
Yeah,
Although I
everything.
think the eclipse is just a normal thing. I don't think that's a weird thing.
Yeah, it's just people being stupid over it. I didn't even know Mercury retrograde was happening. Figures. I'm surprised. I usually keep up with it, but I didn't even know.
Yep.
And I don't know. I'm trying to find my gas list. I sent it to y'all. So
Well, yeah,
anytime I try,
I think you already sent it to me here. Let's see,
yeah,
unless you've updated it.
I can find it and scroll up. I'm on a different computer, so here it is.
Nancy Times, Ron Moorhead, Wallace Wagner.
Yeah.
Those
April 12th is Tiana McQuiller. That's who we were just talking about. April 19th, Matt Allaire. That's with Jay. That's the X-Files dude. He runs the whole X-Files group on Facebook.
Yep.
April 26th is my friend Jerry Avalos. He's coming. He's been on a lot. May 3rd is Brian M. Bowden. That's from some Three Beards podcast. That's Jay. But when you come back, yeah, it's Nancy, Ron Moorhead, and Wallace Wagner. And let me see. And then May 31st is Stephanie Vegas. That's a friend of Graham, the artist guy that wants to come on. Christina's probably going to sit in to do that one. Jim Willis. That's Near Death Experiences, June 7th. And there's some other ones I've scheduled. This one's not that up to date, but it's almost. Ron Moorhead. That's going to be a good one. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
You got his book, right? I sent it to you.
Yeah. I got it.
I need to start looking at it, getting into it. Wallace, I think you were on for that one, or was that Jay? He's like a preacher in UFOs and stuff. He's pretty interesting. He's coming back on. That'll be the 24th. Nancy, that's someone I've known for a while from Yahoo ET Life Chat, and I've been seeing her on all the radio shows lately. I just knew her from a chat room a long time ago, but lately I've been seeing her like on Michelle's show and everybody's show. It's just UFO stuff.
Just UFO stuff. UFO stuff.
Now I see what I think is a UFO in the sky. I'm like, oh, who cares? If they're not going to come down and talk, who gives a crap?
I'm tired of you.
If you're not going to come talk, just screw off. I'm sick of it. Playing your Riddler mess. But hopefully next week's guests don't bail on us again.
Yeah.
I sent her a check-in. I checked in. But Ron Moorhead, who else? I'd have to look on the other computer. But welcome back, Bill. Did you change locations, or is that a weird background?
No, I changed locations. My computer was dying. I didn't get it properly charged up, so I just plugged it into the adapter, and I stepped down into the basement. So now it looks like I'm in a bunker someplace, right?
Yeah, I know. It was like, where are you? Area 51? Like, but yeah, we got Ron Moorhead coming on. That we're looking forward to that. He's got a new Bigfoot book out, so that's pretty cool. So that was the guest that's coming up. But disembodied heads, I can't get over that one. I've always heard stories about those in like native lore and things like that. And then my leg, the legs that's hurting bad is the right, which I know there's no connection to you. But then I started letting my horror, Stephen King, the peg leg man's coming, and all our right legs are hurting. But I think mine's gout. It seems like it, but I know a lot of it. Like I was like looking at the symptoms as my toes hurting. Like that's supposed to be a big one for gout. Like your big toes, like feels like someone's smashing it with a hammer. But a big part of mine is behind the knee and in the knee, and it gets worse when you sleep at night. And you have to turn over and But started taking tart cherry gummies, so hopefully those help. Someone said cherries help, but eventually I'm going to go to a doctor maybe and get that stuff everybody's talking about. They are talking about, but I know for some reason, I don't know why, but tart cherries. It's like they have gummies of it on Amazon that supposed to help with, I guess, uric acid or whatever when you get a buildup of that. And now I'm looking at all the diet crap. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to do that? Like
I started having gout, believe it or not, in 5th grade. And I've dealt with it for my whole life. And I'll tell you, for anybody who's not experienced it, it can be excruciating. It's just awful.
5th grade. Why 5th grade? Why?
I have no idea.
Is it the acid buildup, like just an abnormal amount? That's a big part of it, right? The uric acid or whatever.
I've always been a big sugar head. I think that has something to do with it. And I think red meat has something to do with it also. But I would say probably more on the sugar side for me.
Yeah. Me too, maybe. I mean, I'm not that crazy, but sometimes I'll drink too much soda or something. Not every day, but I've had to stop that and trying to drink different things. But gosh, seeing you in 5th grade eating Fun Dips. Remember those little sticks you dip in the powder? I used to get crazy with those Fun Dips.
I know what you're talking about.
Sometimes I still look for them.
Like 66.
Yeah.
Like a straw full of sugar.
Yeah. But man, I'm looking at the diet stuff and like, crap. I guess I'll just keep the gout maybe. No, I'll try to do it, but I ain't going to be.
If it tastes good, you know it's not good for you.
Yeah, yeah. But so is the pain in y'all's legs and stuff gone away? That's weird. It's like kind of like mimicking the energy pattern of whoever was hurt there. That hopefully may still be there as a ghost or something weird. But that's strange.
For the most part, the dogs seem to be doing okay, and my symptoms aren't what they were a year ago. I mean, I've come a long way with physical therapy, exercise, and just the healing process. So I'm doing better, but I do have that sciatica in the right leg, and the right leg is not as big as the left leg anymore either. It's atrophied. So I'm not as strong on that side as I used to be. Jackie is having some trouble with hers. Her right leg is still bothering her.
So did y'all like look up the house history and get into all that, like a Conjuring movie and all that, and have to find out the background and stuff of who was there? And
We've only looked into it insofar as we know that it was farmland in the relatively recent past, like within the last 10 years, this was farmland. In fact, we didn't even know our townhome is less than a mile down the road, but this little area, this development, we didn't even know it existed. We didn't know houses were even back here until we started shopping for a house. So I guess, long story short, it was farmland, like I said, 10 years ago. Now, the visuals that Harriet has gotten look like they were from like the 1850s, 1860s. There's this individual that she says that she thinks is tied to our property, not necessarily a harmful entity, but that we're experiencing symptoms that they experienced. We don't know exactly what the history here is, though, but we did have somebody else who interviewed us last year who also said the same thing. There's some type of an entity that is attached to our land that had some type of a problem, and they're not here to cause us harm either. Both people we've talked to have said that they're not here to cause us harm, but we're feeling some of the things they felt during their lifetimes as well.
weirdly enough, and I've thought this, my stepdad died in this house and he had gout, but he died from autoimmune. But it's creepy to think about. I mean, I've heard stuff like ghosts can like make the people feel like whatever they experienced or something. Like, I don't know if it's like their baggage and then you just feel it because they're around. Like my dad who died from a heart attack, I've felt weird stuff and figure he was around and things like that. It's weird how that seems like there's some truth to it on a weird, I don't know how or why, but something to it.
You know, speaking of feeling things like that others have experienced in the past. So 2 years ago, when we presented at our first Mothman Festival in 2022, when we debuted our first book, we also, Andy had gone with us to the first Mothman Festival. And before that festival, I want to say a couple months before, we also made a trip to Point Pleasant. And we drove to Charleston, to the area where he and Harriet experienced phenomena back in the 60s. And we had done a ghost box session in that neighborhood once before, but we did a second ghost box session when we were there this other time. And we had Andy and Andy's son, Gibson, and Harriet on a Zoom meeting. And then Jackie and I, as well as another lady who we were traveling with, were doing an Estes session, basically meaning we were asking questions. Andy, Harriet, Gibson, and I were asking questions. And then Jackie and this other lady had headphones on and they had the blindfolds. So they didn't have any real sensory input. But we got all kinds of weird information during this session. And at one point, and we had noticed this the first time we did a ghost box session there also, we felt like an energetic sensation of being pulled up out of our foreheads, like from the third eye area back to the crown chakra, like just energy lifting us up out of our heads. It wasn't painful. It was kind of pleasant, actually, but it was definitely something that you could sense, like an electrical feeling. And Harriet made the comment to us, again, over the Zoom meeting. She said, "Don't you let them take you." And we're like, "Oh, okay. All right. We won't let them take us." And then I started having chest pains. I never have chest pains. Outside of this back injury, I'm as healthy as a horse. So I've never had any trouble with my heart. But she was sensing again that there was somebody that's tied to that land there that had a heart attack, and I was feeling some of their symptoms. And this Zoom ghost box session lasted about 45 minutes. We've got it all recorded, but there is some of the craziest stuff we've ever looked at in the past that all coalesced during our time right there on Bird Mountain in Andy's old backyard.
Interesting, for sure. Has she said anything you can do to try to keep from feeling that stuff, or is there anything that y'all thought of doing, like anything that you can do when you're picking up things like that?
Well, we usually, when we do things like this, and we don't do them often, but when we do sessions like this, we always try to set a positive intention, with a prayer or with a positive vibe or whatever you want to call it, that we don't want any negative entities to attach themselves to us. And have they come home with us? I don't know. I don't think they have. I think what happened to me with my back and my leg, a lot of it had to do with the fact that I have degenerative disc disease and did too much heavy lifting. But then, like I said, with Jackie and our 2 dogs experiencing trouble with our right legs, who knows? That wasn't something we felt in the right leg when we were on Bird Mountain doing the ghost box session. But who knows? Like I said, if we try to set a positive intention to not let anything negative follow us home.
I've never seen it. I mean, I've seen ghost boxes like on TV, but I've never experienced one in person. I bet that's a trip for sure. Do they run on batteries or get plugged up?
Well, all it really is it's like an AM FM receiver. And what it does is it scrolls through the band. So it starts like at 88 on the FM dial and goes up to 107 or what have you. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And what we have for our quote unquote spirit box, ghost box, is an AM FM transponder, and it does AM in the left and then FM in the right. So you're getting this information scrolling back and forth as you're asking questions or having questions asked to you. And as you have the headphones on and you have the blindfold on, you're not getting any sensory input. You're not necessarily hearing the questions that are coming to you, but you are answering whatever is coming through the radio stations that are scrolling back and forth. That's the way the process works for us.
I know here where I'm at in Graceville, there's a Bible college, Baptist college for young people across the way. Then they have this little weird village that's like all these old churches and schoolhouses. Like I call it Little House on the Prairie. And if you go there and read, there's like a pamphlet, which they haven't taken care of it in a while, and the pamphlets got wet, but there's a sign, and it tells this whole weird story. And I forget the year, it was a long time ago, but for some reason, I can't think of what year it was, but it was a while. Basically, there were Spanish monks and natives, and they were trying to convert the natives, and one of the natives refused to convert because he wanted more than one wife, and the rule was you could only have one wife. So basically a slaughter 5 minutes down the road that happened, and it's definitely creepy and definitely feels some creepy things. I've seen some creepy things here, but not any big UFO kind of things. I've heard some weird noises. Like one time it sounded like there was a monkey in a tree hooting at me and Christina, and I wondered if it was Bigfoot or something. I don't know what it was, but it was really weird. It wasn't a person. It was just a weird, like a monkey shouting at you from the tree really close. And I had no idea what it was. But there was also something that slapped the RV here once, and wondered if that might have been a Bigfoot or something like that, because we've been watching some Bigfoot documentaries and things. And we had something slap us the bed at a house that seemed similar, and a glass explode that seemed connected to her on some level. And I saw the glass explode. And then after her grandmother died a night or so later, something slapped the bed, and I thought something fell off a shelf onto the bed, but nothing did. I looked around with a flashlight. Something slapped the bed. And then later here, something slapped the RV, like a boom. And no one was around. It was like someone hand clapped it. I don't know if it's Bigfoot or not, but I wouldn't rule it out. But it's weird when you're around. Like, for instance, my mom's seen she said it was a Mexican man standing in her room late at night. And because who knows, it might have been one of the Spanish monks. I don't know, but it was one of those weird things where you're half asleep and not. She sees weird stuff in those kind of waking states. One time she saw naked Thor in the bathroom. The guy that looked like Thor naked in her bathroom. But
Do we
but
know what Thor? Do we know what Thor looks like? He's not. He's not. He doesn't look. Does he look like Chris Hemsley or whatever?
that's
Hemsley
what
or
I figured. That's who I picture. That's who I picture when I think of it. But I try not to think of it. But she's also had some particular medicine that says that it can make you do weird stuff. Like that's some weird ass medicine. That's a side effect that you see crazy stuff, or restless leg or something that makes you see craziness. And who's to knows if the craziness is real or actually just from the medicine, or the medicine is just opening a door so you can see the craziness. Like there's other ways. So the other thing here, we just had we have a dog, a Rottweiler, passing away right now, and Honey. And she's real weak, and we have a whole area that so many animals have passed that are buried there, and our other relatives just had their Yorkie pass away. So we've had a lot of weird stuff where it seems like there's animal ghosts here. Like you'll feel a wet nose on your leg, or just something weird, just weird stuff, something out of the corner of your eye, things like that. So there's like a whole pet cemetery over there in the other part of the yard.
That's so interesting that you say that, Jeff, because we have heard the sensation of what I call ghost barking in our home since we've lived here. And the long story about why we built this house was 2 years ago, or a little less than 2 years ago, over the 4th of July, we had a cat we put to sleep. He was almost 17 years old, and he was the love of my life. He was a wonderful, wonderful pet, just a great companion. And we put him to sleep because he was beyond. I mean, we were spoon feeding him at the end, and it wasn't fair to let him live. So it was crushing to have him put to sleep. But then we visited the Ozarks, which is about a 550-mile drive one way. My stepdaughter lives down there. So we stopped down there, and she was basically living in a person's home, and she was kind of like taking care of the property out in the woods. And he had a pair of dogs that had a litter of puppies. Had 12 puppies in this litter. They're lab mixes. Half of them were eaten by wild animals. Our 2 girls who we adopted and brought home with us, they would never have survived. They'd be gone now too. But we have heard, we built this house because we were living in a townhome at the time, and we didn't have a yard, and it was just too much to be running those dogs out all the time as puppies. So we built a home. We wanted a house anyway, but long story short is we got free puppies. It cost us an arm and a leg, and I'll never be able to retire now. But we have this nice, beautiful home, and we have these barking sensations that happen at night now. Our dogs will be sound asleep. They don't hear it, but we hear it. And we hear it in different areas of the house. And my thought is that it might be their siblings, the spirits of their siblings, that followed them into this house, and they're still with them. But the dogs never notice it. We notice it. It's really, really bizarre.
Wow, that's a trip for sure. And there's been a lot of different things. I know my mom, a lot of times I feel something get in the bed with her like almost every night. And I don't know if it's an animal that passed or her former husband that passed. Like, I mean, I don't know. My biggest worry about all this is what if you croak and you just have to stay where you're living on some level or something like that. Like that's where you go. That would suck. Hopefully not. I would think not. But that's a fear that you just stay where you are. That would really suck.
We had a really interesting experience about 6 weeks ago. Has either of you ever watched the TV show called The Dead Files?
Heard of it, but I don't think I've seen it. I've heard of it.
So what it is it's a pair of people. There's a retired New York City police detective.
Oh yeah, I have actually seen it. I've seen it like maybe a few times.
Amy Allen is a psychic, and the 2 of them do independent investigations of haunted places. Now, where we live, we're about 35 miles away from where they did one of their shows. And the place that they did this show is called the Roadhouse. It's in Oregon, Illinois, about 100 miles west of Chicago. So there was a murder that took place in this area, and the last place these people were seen alive was at this bar before it was called the Roadhouse back in I think it was in the 1940s. And this gentleman who runs the place now swears that the place is haunted by spirits of this young woman who was killed and her date that night, and so on and so forth. So we went and we attended this haunted dinner that they put on there. This was, like I say, probably about 6 weeks ago. And as we're there, Jackie has a malmeter with her, which calculates different disturbances and pressure and temperature changes, things like this. And she also has an app on her phone that's picking up data also. And we're having the dinner, and the gentleman who runs the place is giving his lecture and telling us about what's going on. And these random voices start popping out of Jackie's phone. And I said, will you turn that thing down? He's talking. We're having dinner right now. I get that you're getting information, but we need to like quiet this thing down. So she looks at me kind of half cocked and she turns it down. And long story short, the lady who was tending bar that night is also part of this paranormal show that they do. And I overheard her talking about how she was in a car accident and she lost her 4-year-old son in the car accident. And then she went on to say that he's still with her. He comes home with her every night, and every night he throws the cabinet doors open and she has to close all of them. And so she knows that he's with her, just being mischievous. And it was a nice story. And so I asked her if she wanted to be a part of our next book, and she said that she would. Now, what I didn't know was that when Jackie and I separated for a little while that night, and she went with some of the other ladies from the group, and I was visiting with some of the people in the group, she got 3 hits on her phone. And those 3 hits said, "Mom, where are you? Jessica." Guess what this bartender's name was?
Jessica.
Yes.
That's nice.
I just got chills as I said that to you, because it's like almost irrefutable evidence that what she's telling us is true.
Yeah, that's nice. That's a sweet story.
It really is, isn't it?
It's a sweet story.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
It's got to bring her a lot of comfort. Now, we didn't get a chance to share that with her because she didn't respond to my initial email. And then I thought maybe she had second thoughts about participating. But I've got her phone number. I want to call her and I want to tell her about this, because it's validating, and you'd like to believe that that's 100% legit, that this is happening. And she still has that closeness with her since passed on son.
Definitely. And some of the big ones that I had that seemed like it could have been related to deceased loved ones was seeing beings of light with physical eyes, completely sober. And I made sure to make sure that happens then. But as far as one of the big ones, when I was at a lake here in Florida, I was inside, and for some reason I was watching some Watchword Bible where you play it on DVD, and I probably felt something was around and was trying to just, protect myself or something. I don't even know if I still have that, but I was playing it and something said, go outside and look, towards the house. So I went outside and turned towards the house, and it was as if there were beings of light it was basically just people made of light, as if they were in the house, flew straight through the roof, and I watched them go straight into the heavens. And I wasn't on tobacco, not even weed. That's a miracle. Completely sober. And it seemed related to the Bible stuff on some level. Not going to get all fruity with that, but I was listening to it. And I wondered if it was deceased loved ones, or maybe they says, oh, Jeffrey's listening to the Bible. We're going to go down. Maybe this time we can work with him. I don't know what it was, but
he's open to us now.
Yeah. And it was definitely 2 people made of light, but you couldn't see their faces. It was just like a humanoid form. And I've gotten chills talking about it. And there's been times where I've seen them in that, like beings of light in the heavens, to where you can look out into the stars, and it's almost like there's another realm up there, and some of them are in that. And I've wondered if and you feel like something's touching you and showing you. And then later you can go out and look, and it's like dull and you don't see anything. And I know when I went through chemo and stuff, I prayed to be a superhero and stuff. I was in the comics. I was croaking. It spread to my stomach and lungs. I prayed to be healed and to be a superhero. I was 17, but it was like something heard that. And I guess the death and all that drew the experiences. But the beings of light, I've heard different things, angels, aliens, but for some reason, I think that's what we kind of look like when we're not in our bodies. So there's something to that. And also, when you sleep, does our like luminous being of light part of us go to another realm, like, project into the astral realm? And I was seeing all that. It almost looked like a Sims game, which I don't even like the Sims game, but that's what it reminded me of, like a bunch of Sims talking to each other in a video game with the little bubbles. But it was beings of light. And I've had some medicine men on, one in Peru that says they see them down there in the sky and have festivals and like party and watch them. And he has them on video, and he's pretty well known, Don Oscar. He's been in a lot of self-help stuff and things like that. So that's been one of my big ones, and that one I think is a comforting one. It's a lot more comforting than little creepy phantasm dwarfs in robes with a black box, that's for sure. But yeah, the beings of light is my biggest experience, besides the UFO stuff, for sure.
That's really positive. That's really positive. Back in 2010, I befriended a man who had become homeless. He had all kinds of substance problems, and he couldn't afford to keep a place to live. But he wanted to get himself straightened out, and he made a lot of headway and got off the drugs, got off the alcohol. He was really cleaning himself up. He was in his early 50s at the time, and he had told me that he'd been to the doctor and that they said that he had pleurisy, which is a condition I was not familiar with at that point in time. I've come to understand what it is since then. But long story short, he didn't have a place to live, but we found a place about 70 miles away from where we live now that was able to take him in for the summer. And so he went to this place, stayed there for a time, and then he came back to where we live to get some legal things taken care of, but he wasn't feeling quite right. And he made it like a year clean and sober. He was doing well that way. But then he found out that it wasn't pleurisy that he had. He actually had cancer, and it metastasized. And it ended up going into his brain and into his lungs and, I mean, everywhere. And he was able to kind of make peace with his family, his estranged wife, his children he hadn't seen for many, many years. And then he passed away on hospice a short time after that. And it was really heartbreaking to watch him, get his life in order just to check out. Now, Jackie knew that it was pretty profoundly disturbing to me to lose him, to be that close to him towards the end. And she's a meditator. So she had gone into the closet to get into some deep meditation. And during her time in meditation, he approached her from the other side. And he said, "Please tell Bill thank you for what he did for me. I really appreciate it, that I'm in a good place now. And I just want him to know that." And she's not one to just pull stuff out of the air. She's a very literal person. She's very much into data and that kind of thing. But being a meditator and having had some of the other worldly experiences she's had, when this happened, she was very keen to it. And it was a couple years later that her dad passed away. And after he passed away, he woke her up at 3:33 a.m. and just basically said, "Jackie," super loud. And she sat bolt upright in bed, and she knew it was him. And since then, we've also, her brother also passed away, but she's smelled cigarette smoke. Neither one of us smokes, but they both did. And so they come to visit every once in a while, and she gets that sensory input that she knows is them, or at least believes is them. But that whole thing with John, coming from the other side and telling her, "Tell Bill I'm okay," I'll never forget that.
What is up with the cigarette smoke thing and cigars when you are a ghost? Surely you're not smoking cigarettes and cigars. Maybe you can just make the odor appear.
No, that's one of the things that happens at that haunted gym that I was talking about. Because we know that at least there are several different types of manifestations there, but we know that the most common one is some presence of the guy who was a past owner of the building. The building is still in the family. The family that he's part of still owns that building. It's like his granddaughter now owns the building, but the guy who built the building, basically, what he did was he smoked a cigar. So that for example, some of the manifestations are there's a the building is a large building, and it has like businesses on the bottom level, and then on the top level there are a number of apartments that people live in. And there's this one apartment where it's very common for people to come home, and they'll find, regardless of the weather, that the kitchen window has been cracked a little bit. Even if it's cold, it's been cracked, even if they closed it, and they'll smell the smell of cigars. And that's where he used to sit. That was the apartment that he sat in when he lived there. And also there have been a number of instances, and this is in front of, whole classes of people working out, that all of a sudden everyone will smell cigar smoke moving through the room. Not the ambiance of cigar smoke, but cigar smoke moving through the room. And that's been experienced by, multiple people at once. And so and he smoked cigars. He also liked to hang out with people and he was a practical joker, so he liked to sort of freak people out. One of the things he liked to do, apparently, the gym that I go to has like a back door, and I always think of it as the front door. It's not the front door, but that's the door that everybody goes in and out of. So I think of it as the front door, but it's actually the back door. And apparently what he would do is he would walk around, and he would occasionally look in to the back doors of the businesses just to see what was going on. He'd just stick his face at the window, and people have actually in broad daylight seen the image of a face pressed up against the window that has disappeared. We in fact, the guy who rents that place, my trainer, he's taken partial photos of it.
Oh, wow.
So, one of which I reproduce in my book, Mysterious Beauty. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. But he's not a scary one. There are other things that pop up in the building. I think that actually part of the reason is because his presence is so strong, and he hasn't left, that it's kind of left a doorway for other things. You know what I mean? He has sort of created his own portal without necessarily meaning to. So
we did a ghost box session when we were in Point Pleasant a few years ago. In fact, we were watching it right before I joined you guys tonight. Jackie had it on the TV, and it was in a dance studio right across the river from Point Pleasant, in the town of Gallipolis, Ohio. The young lady who asked us to come in and do this, she works for the Mothman Museum, and she also worked in this dance studio. And she said that there was like an apparition of a very young boy, like 3 years old, who was kind of pestering some of the kids in this dance studio. So we went in and did like an hour-long ghost box session in there at that time. And we got all kinds of really strange information. The young lady who had us do this is a descendant of Carolyn Harris, who we dedicated our first book to, who ran the Mothman Diner. And she lost her young son, Timmy, in the Silver Bridge disaster. And we kept getting hits like this could have possibly been him. And he had drowned in the Ohio River during the Silver Bridge disaster. And now he's haunting this particular dance studio. Now, we don't know that that's the case, but we got some information that led us to kind of think it's a possibility. We had some really strange input from that session as well.
Kitty. There's a kitty.
This is my kitty cat, Goose.
Hi, Goose.
She's a lover girl.
We got a black cat named Charlotte May here. We just got another one that Christina got that's apparently it's gray and one of the wild ones, but it's only been here a night and it just keeps meowing and trying to lunge at us. I finally pet it because it got under a garbage can that was tilted weird, and it made it so I could pet it, and it didn't bite me. But the weird thing is with it is it's pretty much a new cat, and we have a lot of dogs here and everything, but we just it's only been here a night. We haven't named it yet. But apparently, the neighbors in the neighborhood and stuff, there were mean people there that would hunt its siblings and do horrible
Oh
things.
no, that's
So
terrible.
you can tell that it's not trusting humans. But let me pet its head today, which was good. Which I was like afraid the whole time it was going to try to get me
Sure.
with little lunge. It tried to jump somehow and jump through a mirror because it thought it was a window.
Oh,
He was acting crazy. But we have mice problems. There's fields behind us, and it's the craziest thing. These mice are little. I guess they're like, I don't know what kind they are, but I guess field mice, because when they do the fields, they come up and go crazy, but they're very small. But anyway, we've had to use that green crap poison, which I don't know what else to do. And I feel bad about that because other things can get it, but there's so many, it's absolutely insane. They even broke into the bags of that on shelves and ate. It's like they're trying to genocide themselves. But the worst part is just the damage that they do to things. Like, I don't want to kill them, but they've messed up some books. They messed up some of my Andy books, and he
Oh,
gave me.
no.
I'm gonna kill you all, World War III, which is what I've been doing. And I hate it. It's not like I want to do it, but they really are a-holes.
So you can't see it from where I'm sitting right now with my screen, but off to the right here is where I have a ton of my books, and I have a whole row and a half dedicated to Andy books. I have a ton of them.
Very nice indeed. And he just told me some new ones coming out, which I forget the names of them, but he has some other ones coming out that are just like, from his publishing and everything. And he sent me some boxes of books that when he's cleaning out books. I got a lot of weird books.
He did the same for us. When he was in Seattle a couple summers ago, he shipped us box after box after box of research materials that he's used over the years. But Lisa, his wife, has called him a hoarder, and he doesn't want to be a hoarder, so he's getting rid of stuff he's not reading anymore.
So what's next? You've been doing a lot of the radio circuit. How's that been? That's been an experience. Have you been on Coast to Coast yet?
I was on Coast to Coast once a couple of years ago before the first book came out. In fact, I was on with Ian Purnett, who has since passed away. So I did that probably 2.5 years ago. But yeah, lots of shows. I've been on Paracast. We've been together, you and I, for I think this is our third time. And it's been a lot of fun. I mean, we've really been enjoying it.
Definitely. I got to do something with a dog, the one that's hurt. But Wham, if you'll take over for a second, and I'll come right back.
Sure. Hold on just a sec. I've got all these people messaging me, so I've been having to sort of do chat as well as.
We got a Rottweiler she's about to check out Honey, not doing well. But
how old is she?
Like 10 or something, 10 or 12, like the oldest that they're supposed to be before they croak, that whatever year that is. So my mom's told me, it's not mine, but 12. But I'll be right back just a second.
Sure, not a problem. Oh, so how long do you think it's gonna be before you can get this material together in a book-like form?
I would very much like to do it in 2024, but I think the likelihood of that happening is probably pretty slim. The thought that I have at this point is probably summer of 2025. It should be ready to go to press then, because we're only really in the very beginning of conducting the interviews. We have a half-baked literature review, but that's really just collecting a lot of psychological articles and some other paranormal books to give us a background to the study. So the likelihood is it's going to be, I'd say, at least a year to 15 months before it's complete.
Speaking as one academic to another, if you need any help with anything, I've got like tons of stuff. This is something that kind of what you're doing is part of what informed certain aspects of my dissertation.
I would love
So,
to collaborate with you. In fact, as you were sharing some of your experiences earlier on in our conversation, it seems to me that you'd be a wonderful candidate if you'd like to participate in this book.
well, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeffrey can give you my email. So, but yeah, and I also have, I know that it's kind of when you're doing research on these things, it's kind of hard to find. I don't know why it's hard to find. I think it's just because we do research differently than we used to. It's kind of hard to find older sources sometimes, you know what I mean? But I have some of those older sources. So, or things that places you can get them. So, that might be able to help like round out your literature section, that kind of stuff. So, I'm willing to help in whatever way. Just because I think this is it's an interesting way of talking about consciousness, I think, really. Because I do think that trauma, lots of people experience different types of trauma, but I do think that certain types of trauma combined with certain contexts and certain people do create contexts that it's not that it makes the experiences happen. It's just, I think what it does is it tunes a person to perceptions of realities that are always there, really. It's not like it's creating the experience, but it's making you open to the possibility that what we see in this world, what we immediately experience, is a cover for something else or is an expression of something else, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And the first thing that came to mind in John Keel's research, specifically a book called The Eighth Tower, he really talks a lot about our perception of reality. We're only able to see a certain portion of the spectrum. And he likens it to kind of like we talked about the ghost box. If you're scrolling across frequencies, every once in a while you get a hit. And I think that there are things that are out there that are just beyond our everyday five sense experience, but they're not that far away. It takes a certain predisposition or perhaps traumatic event or eye-opening aha moment, a mountaintop experience, whatever it might be, to get us to be able to see things beyond the noise of our everyday existences. I think these things are always going on. I think they co-occur with our perception of reality. They're just a little bit beyond our normal perceptive faculty, but they're there. It's just a matter of being able to dial into them.
Yes. Well, yeah, exactly. And being open to the possibility. Our society is very, and I guess I don't know if you're familiar with the Seth material, but
a little bit.
The Seth material has influenced significantly kind of the way that I see the way reality works, I guess. And it's not that our egos are bad, because I don't want to get locked in that, but it's that our egos are often very fixated, very focused in particular directions. And that can cause a kind of rigidity about what reality is. And I think that what happens is trauma or any event that kind of falls outside of things that you've experienced, that if you don't have a frame of reference for it, I think a lot of those kinds of experiences, I think actually even falling in love can do this if it's intense enough, but it what it does is it disrupts that rigidity. And And then you have to be open to the possibility that what you thought you don't know. And that right there, there's a whole, there's a whole huge percentage of people who don't even want to do that. They don't even want to go there. And that can cause fear. It can also cause, I lived in a religious household that was so rigid in some ways that to try to understand reality in any other way than my father presented it wasn't just blasphemy. It was like violating his sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And he had really violent reactions to that. So he was very, and I understand it had to do with where he came from. I didn't understand that till I was older, but I think that experiences like illness, like the experience that I had with COVID, which was a very physical experience, but also a very psychological experience in a lot of ways, and a spiritual experience in other ways. To me, that shows that told me about, it didn't tell me about the origin of the disease. It didn't tell me about how the disease necessarily travels or works or gets caught, but it told me about why I got sick and how I got sick with it. It's kind of a spiritual biology, if you will. It's not just a mechanical thing, and that's why some people just never get sick. Or there are all kinds of incommensurates with COVID that they haven't quite figured out. Things like, you look at Sweden and Norway, for example. Sweden and Norway have very similar populations. They have very similar in terms of demographics. They have very similar rates of poverty and wealth, and very similar health care systems. And they adopted different strategies for dealing with COVID. And yet, one I can't remember now whether it was Norway or Sweden, but one of them adopted a less stringent, a less restrictive policy towards COVID than the other. But they had about the same amount of infection, although who died differed, and it was the more restrictive culture trying to control it that had more deaths.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's not just a mechanical thing. It's not just diseases are, I think of pandemics as not just simply a pathogen getting out of control or a contagion, but there are many things that are contagious, including fear and materialism and soul sickness. There are lots of things that are contagious, and they can all be expressed through the process of a pandemic. But we don't. But our doctors don't see that. So,
well, they're trained scientifically, and I think as you were sharing what you were just sharing, what came to my mind is a spiritual malaise or spiritual
exactly
disharmony. Really, I was struggling with disequilibrium, but that's not the right term. It's a spiritual disharmony. And as you were talking about this, and I've never stopped to consciously think of this, when I got really, really sick with that pre-COVID mystery virus, which probably was COVID, when that happened, I was going through a lot of cognitive dissonance in my career, my day job, in which I had been working extremely hard for this organization and working on my doctorate and doing everything I could to be excellent at everything that I did. And what was happening wasn't the course I had charted out for me. I was losing social capital in the organization that I worked for
Right.
because I didn't fit their paradigm. And I was hitting all this cognitive dissonance, and I was incredibly frustrated. And I was trying to do everything that I could to continue to establish myself within that company. And it didn't matter what I did. I was on the wrong ladder. I was barking up the wrong tree. And I was slipping back, slipping back, slipping back. And then I got sick as all get out, and all bets were off. And all I had to do was stay home, recover, and watch Indiana Jones movies. And although I was sick as all get out, I was having such a better time watching television than I was trying to prove myself within this reality. It really wasn't my reality. It's not where I was supposed to be. And I've never stopped to think about that until this conversation. So thank you for bringing this out. I'd never considered it before, but I think that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, well, I've learned over the years, and I first observed this in myself when I was a child. I noticed as a child, and I mean, I'm talking like when I was in first or second grade, I noticed that there was a relationship between when I got ill and certain kinds of emotional upsets that were going on in my household between my parents and just other things. And I noticed that. In fact, I remember very distinctly once performing an experiment in which I successfully made myself sick, and just by thinking about it, and doing it because I felt like I wanted and needed more attention than I was getting. And so it's not that every time I've gotten ill, I've thought of that, because, I get distracted and whatever, but I have found that, for example, if something makes me really, really angry, like deeply, profoundly angry, and I don't kind of face it and deal with it quickly, I will be like on my back ill within 24 hours. And it's not that I shouldn't get angry about certain things. It's what I do with it. And most major illnesses and accidents that I've had, because I've had a number of accidents, where I've broken bones or, been severely injured where I had to recover. I even was electrocuted and almost killed once. All of those ailments have had some kind of connection to something, to a crisis that was building in my life that I was either not attending to or couldn't face for some reason. And that event, whether it was an illness or an accident, or in the case of the electrocution, that was a way of me giving myself a crisis that I could handle, or that I would have to handle. It was like an expression of what was going on. But it also was a way by which to expiate the energy of that tension in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, it's also very self-destructive. It was kind of my version of cutting.
Yeah.
It was very, and once I figured that out, I started to really consciously work to not do that. And it took several years to figure out how not to do that. And now I get to the point where it's like, when I'm in a situation where I feel that tension, I'll start observing myself, and because I'll get kind of a feeling inside. I'll be like, you need to be careful now. You need to be careful now, because this is when you used to fall down the stairs a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever I would do. And I've been able to keep it from being, I fell down the stairs, caught myself actually, and so didn't fall all the way down the stairs. But I fell about, I guess it was maybe about a month ago, but I knew that was happening. And so I caught myself and kept it from being really bad. And I remember laying at the bottom of the stairs going, just stop. It's like, and it was in a public place. So I know there were people around that were like, what is wrong with this woman? I was just laying there going, I didn't hurt myself. It was just, I just knew that I looked like an idiot. It was just like,
hey guys, sorry, we got like 1 minute left.
Oh, so. Bill has to tell everybody where he's from and what he's doing.
Yeah, give us some linkage. Bill, it's been great. Give it, and we appreciate it so much. It's always a pleasure. What's some links?
Well, again, Jeffrey, Professor Wham, thank you so much for having me on tonight. I cannot believe how fast our time together has gone. The best way to find me is either on Facebook, Bill Kousoulas, my wife, Jackie Myers Kousoulas. We have a brand new website that we just kicked off about a month ago. It's PRP, like Phenomenology Research Professionals, prpconnect.org. That's the quickest way to find us. Our email address is on there as well, too. It's prpconnect@outlook.org.
Right.
Very cool. And let Jackie know that we hope she gets better. And we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
And like I said, you can get my email from Jeffrey. So
I will do that. Absolutely.
Okay.
And let me know if there's anything you need from me ever. And also, I write good blurbs.
He writes great blurbs.
Blurbage.
This has been a really fun conversation. Thank you for having me on tonight.
All right. Thanks so much, Bill. Take care.
Good evening.
Good night, everybody. Listening to Public Radio 107.7 FM New Orleans. Watch out for Mercury retrograde, and watch out for that eclipse. Good night, everybody.